Welcome back to Step Up, where we learn from the best of the best in business. I'm David Wolf, media producer, and now here's your host, speaker psychologist, supporter of military families, and sassy grandmother, Dr. Margarita Curry.
Well, thank you, David Wolf.
You are welcome.
Today, I'm very delighted to have Dr. Julia Harper with us. This podcast is about bringing the wisdom from the best of the best in business. And Dr. Julia Harper, in my opinion, is one of the most innovative occupational therapists and psychologists that I have ever met. Dr. Julia Harper, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Curry. So happy to be here.
I am delighted. I met Julia in a long time ago. I think it was 2007. And what hit me was her energy. She walks into a room, and as I describe it, she has that kind of face that makes everyone either snap to or think about, no, I'm not going to do that. And she's amazing. And I'm sorry we're not capturing her face. Another time we'll have to do a video snippet. So please tell us about Therapeeds. It's been your life work. You have this growing business, 55 people. It's a global entity. Therapeeds is an internationally registered trademark. You're changing the lives of thousands and thousands and thousands of people, including mine. So please tell us about Therapeeds and what made you think about it in the first place.
Well, wow. I have to say that everything that I've done over the years, over 20-something years of my career, has been focused on one thing, the word change. And what created Therapeeds and is at the lifeblood of Therapeeds is the word neuroplasticity, which says that the brain has the potential and possibility to change. I love Emily Dickinson's statement, growing possibilities. And so when I entered the world of therapy, traditional therapy was about making small changes in children and in people's lives, whereby people showed up, they complained about a particular thing, and you worked on that thing, and you hoped for it to change. And, you know, you got some changes and you moved along. But that was never enough for me. You know, I was a preemie. I came home in a shoebox. And at 28 weeks, they told my parents that she was going to die. And then I didn't. Surprise, spoiler alert.
I noticed that you didn't die. You don't listen to rules well anyway. So
not at all. I didn't die. And I decided not only would I not die, but that I was here to change the world. And so the way that I thought best to change the world was to see how we can actually access real change. And so I focused in on the fact that the brain, which is what facilitates all function and behavior in human beings, has the ability to change. And so I started off in one little room in Cooper City in Florida. Well, actually, I started off in New York City, but then I moved to Florida in 2004, and I decided to have one little room in Cooper City in Florida where I was just going to tinker a bit with the brain and play around and see if I could actually access neuroplasticity and make real change. And in spite of myself, that one room has now turned into a 15,000 square foot office space, which actually we are now in the process of building our own headquarters.
Wow.
A 30,000 square foot building, yes.
Great.
And it has grown into a staff of close to 60, and people and families coming from all over the world for one thing and one thing only. Not for what Julia does, but because the brain can change. And what we're looking at is we use two methods that I created. One is called the HOPE method that focuses on changing the physiology of the brain. And the second is called the WAY method, which is changing the psychology of the brain. Because ultimately what I studied is that not only do you have to change what happens inside the brain physiologically, that the structures of the brain can change, but that you also have to change the psychological environment in which that brain functions. And so that's what the WAY method is about, is changing the psychology or the environment of the brain so that we can maximize potential. So at Therapeeds, what we do is we offer a way to hope. The two methods sit side by side to change the brain of all limitations, physiological and psychological.
Wow. Well, I'm very glad that you came home in a shoebox and beat all the odds, because you're certainly helping us all beat the odds. I met Dr. Julia when she was in that one blue room. Wow. And saw her grow. Her way of looking at things is so amazing that she is one of the most inspirational entrepreneurs I have ever met. In fact, one of the few medical entrepreneurs that I have ever met in the healthcare business. Sure. So since this is a podcast primarily focused on entrepreneurs, please help us understand the HOPE method and the WAY method for anyone who's out there who's stuck or wants to do something even better. What advice do you give them from all of your amazing wisdom and expertise?
So it's wonderful that we're talking about this, because in a couple of days I'll be doing a talk on Are You a Super Professional? One of the things that I'm most excited to do is to take this message of hope and way beyond the world of therapy into the world of business, into the world of parenting, into the world in general. Because, there's a saying, how you do anything is how you do everything. So as an entrepreneur, when I started off doing this, one of the things that happened the most to me was that fear of failure. You take a chance. Everybody knows that when you are getting ready to go into a business, you are taking a risk, you're taking a chance. And when you take that risk, there's this part of your brain called the brainstem, the lower brainstem, that is designed to protect you. So you put yourself out there, and whatever risk you're taking, whether it is to start a business or to start a relationship, to go back to school, that lower brainstem is designed to tell you, wait, watch out, you're in danger. Mm-hmm. And what it does automatically, without your permission, without you even knowing it, is it offers you a protection. And the way it offers you protection is through reaction, flight, fright, and freeze. Now, the interesting thing, and I discovered this in myself, and I've looked at it across the board, whether it is that we're looking at human beings in all challenging situations, work, relationship, parenting. What happens is these reactions can have an obvious form, which you see and you know, but more importantly, 80% of our reactions are actually hidden. So we find ourselves behaving in ways that actually interrupt or hijack what we want, and we don't know it. So specifically related to business, I decide I'll use me as an example. We are deciding to expand and grow the business and to build our headquarters. And of course, the number one thing that happens to me as I take this risk is I don't want to lose all of my money. I don't want to fail. I don't want the bank to not give me the loan. And the moment that I get into this don't want, what happens in the brain whenever you're faced with the potential of a don't want, something happening that you don't want to happen, is your brainstem immediately offers you this reaction. So what was my reaction in that don't want? To fight. Now, it wasn't the obvious fight where I went into the bank and I yelled and screamed and cursed anybody out.
If I was a banker, I wouldn't say no to you. She is one fierce-looking woman. Yes, her eyes can pierce you.
But fight in this form, in the hidden form, when we're fighting, what we do is we fight for control. So we go into control mode. Any form of control is fight, whether you're controlling by trying to get everything done perfectly, whether you're trying to control by making sure that you plan everything out perfectly, whether you're trying to control by making sure you control how people perceive you. Anywhere there is the word or the attempt to control, it is as a result of your brainstem offering you the reaction of fight.
This is fascinating.
Another way that your brain...
I'm sorry to interrupt. So just to restate, so that's the root cause of across the spectrum, all of these things. How fascinating that it's ubiquitous, this reactivity.
Yes, it is, because I tell people, if you have a brain, this is happening to you. And this is not something that's happening to you consciously. It's happening unconsciously at the subcortical levels of your brain. Mm-hmm. Another way that our brain stems offer us a reaction that we don't recognize is in the flight form. Now, people think flight is about just running away, but it's about avoidance of conflict. So often, for instance, in business, when you find yourself people-pleasing, when you find yourself negotiating, when you find yourself trying to seek agreements, when you're trying to avoid somebody not liking you, you're in that situation with your coworkers, or you're trying to open that business or to take that risk, and you find yourself looking towards pleasing and not really standing in what you know is true for yourself, that is and a flight reaction. And too many times we do that and we betray ourselves and we don't even recognize it.
So what's the
flight
solution?
Is something that shows up.
So let's say an entrepreneur who's... Yes, go ahead.
Well, let me get to the third, and then I'll talk about the solution.
Okay, great.
So fight is the one where we're seeking control. Flight is the one where we're avoiding, and we're avoiding conflict at any cost. And sometimes that, we're negotiating, over-negotiating, people-pleasing. And the third is freeze. So the hidden version of freeze is when you ignore. So there's a sneaky way we ignore. There's, of course, the obvious ignoring. There's a problem over there, and I'm just going to, ignore that the problem even exists. That's freeze. But the sneakiest form of freeze is when you put on those rose-colored glasses and you pretend that the problem is something else. You go, oh, no, it's going to be okay. I'll be all right. And you say to yourself, oh, I'm a positive person. And often people get shocked when I say positivity is a reaction, but future positivity is a reaction, because every time I'm thinking in the future, what I'm not dealing with is what's in front of me. I'm ignoring what's in front of me to pretend that I'm being positive about the future. The only way that you could truly be positive is in the present. If you're being positive in the future, you are ignoring the present and you're using a reaction. It's a hidden reaction. So I just wanted to highlight the three reactions because they're hidden and they're in so many areas of our lives, and they undermine us, whether we're trying to open a business or even in our parenting. But specifically to opening a business, or being an entrepreneur, having an idea, you are at risk of these reactions popping up and stopping you. And so, Dr. Margarita, to your question, what do you do about it? The first thing I ask people to do is to see it, because you can't change what you can't see. So if this is happening and you don't see it, then there's nothing to do. So since we're talking about rewiring the brain and accessing neuroplasticity, what you have to do is take that which is unconscious, that which is happening at the subcortical levels of your brain, and bring it up to consciousness, because you can use your cortex to override your brainstem, but only when you are aware of what your brainstem is doing.
So how do we become aware?
So we become aware by practicing noticing these reactions in our lives. So the first thing I tell people is, don't pretend you're not reacting. One of the biggest things that I have come across is when I say to people that you are reacting, they say, no, I'm not reacting. A lot of times, right?
So then what do they do then?
Yeah, but first of all, they say, no, I'm not reacting. And then the second thing is that they also assume that reaction looks only one way, which is the obvious form of reaction: yell, scream, hit, fight.
Right.
Or, that's what people's reactions are. So first things first, acknowledge and accept that as long as you have a brainstem, you're reacting. And B, recognize that reactions, most of them actually are in the hidden form. They're not in the obvious form. So if you think you are, for those of us who actually say, yes, I am reactive, if you think you know your reactions, you only know one little piece of them. So that's the first thing. If we could see that this is part of our physiology, then we can open up our minds to it. Because one of the reasons why people do not want to acknowledge reaction is they think that they're responsible for it, rather than understanding it's just what my brain does.
Wow.
You don't feel bad when you're reacting. Don't feel bad when you're reacting.
So there's this acceptance of the physiology, the way we're wired, this quality that all humans share. And there's no reason to feel responsible for it. So there's this shift from feeling responsible and feeling connected.
Bad.
Feeling lousy. Right.
So Dr. Julia, in my training, we were told a long time ago, because I'm now a sassy grandmother, that the fight, flight, and freeze with fright, that we all were born with a predisposition for one or the other, and that life experiences and training could shift it from one to another. And there was always some sort of shame and blame at freezing or fleeing. So please address the issue of those. Are we born with a predisposition, and can we change those, or what's the new view of this?
Well, the science shows that actually all three are available to us at any given time. What is clear is that your personality / predisposition biases you to a particular type. So just think, I know you know me well enough, Margarita, to know that my predisposition is fight.
No,
Okay.
I never noticed. Never. Yes, yours
It
is.
doesn't mean, right. So let's think about it this way, in a very logical way, because the point of reaction is that they have a purpose and they serve the purpose to protect. So if somebody walks into a room with a gun and you're in that room, okay, you may have a predisposition to decide to fight. But if you look at the situation and fighting isn't going to help you, guess what? You're going to run. And if you can't run, you'll hide. So you will use whatever you need to survive. And that is the truth of it. We do have a tendency to one over the other, but at any given moment, we could use either of them or all of them.
So as individuals, we have a biased or a primary go-to. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Of the three,
exactly.
right.
So why is there so much shame about the idea of not being a fighter? Or in some groups, the being a fighter. Why is there shame associated with one of those three reaction types?
Well, what happens is that people are feeling ashamed of the behavior without understanding that it's the brain that creates it. So, the reaction is created for the purpose of a real threat. Somebody comes in with a gun. You're in an accident. Something that is a real threat is the purpose of a reaction. The challenge that's happening to us now is that we are reacting in the presence of what we call a perceived threat, not a real threat. So it's not about what is actually dangerous to me. It's what's a don't want. So as I said earlier, anytime something happens to you that you don't want to happen, your brainstem transfers it from just a don't want to a threat, because it's threatening something in your well-being. So at that very point that it turns it into a threat, you are reacting. And because it's not a real threat, your behaviors look inappropriate. So now here you are, a human being, demonstrating a behavior that is not appropriate for the threat that is in front of you. And that's where people start to feel shame and blame. So we get this whole connection around, I behaved badly when I reacted. And the reality of it is, the only thing that truly happened is my brainstem perceived the threat and drove a reaction. So the brainstem created the reaction, but you're left holding the bag. Nobody blames the brainstem. Everybody blames you.
So what do we do about this? We become aware. How do we become aware?
Well, so like I was saying earlier, once you acknowledge that this is going to happen to me, that this is happening to me, that this is part of my physiology, then I open my eyes to it. I start to notice, and this is what I help people with all the time. I say, start with the small don't wants. Don't go to the big don't wants. The big ones like, the bank said no, or your invention was rejected, or you couldn't afford the lease on the new office, or your idea was criticized. Don't start there. Don't start in the big don't wants. Start with the little ones. The traffic light is red, and I need it to be green. I want to go to the bathroom.
I don't know anything about
line.
that. Yeah, no, it's great.
I'm standing in public to pay, and there's a woman in front of me paying with a check, and notice those little don't wants. I don't want her to be paying with a check. I don't want to wait to pee. I don't want the light to be red. When you see those little don't wants, what happens in you is you see it, and then you say, what is my brainstem offering me? And notice the reaction. Notice how you start to fight in your head. Stupid woman, why the hell is she paying with a check? Notice how irritated you get about the bathroom. Notice how you pretend, no, it's all right, it's fine. Start to see your pattern. Your brainstem will show you your pattern. And as you see that pattern, you get to learn yourself. And then you have evidence and you have something to rewire. Because ultimately what you get to is you can then recruit your cortex and say, hey, this is just a don't want. This is not a threat. At the level of your brainstem, every don't want is a threat. At the level of the cortex, you know the difference between a perceived threat and a real threat.
So in business, what can business leaders do to help spread this idea with their teams, their leadership teams, and with their staff?
Well, one of the things that I love to help business leaders to see is that at work, right? One of the I see often at work that people have this idea that emotions should stay out of the office. And we know Now, with all the research that's out there in industrial psychology and human resources, that went out with a twist. We can no longer think of work as the no emotion zone. What I'd love business leaders to also recognize is that you cannot think of work as the no reaction zone. You cannot because to think of work as the no reaction zone is to think of work as the no brain zone. You want people to bring their brains to work with them. You want creativity. You want innovation. Well, they're going to walk into the office with a brain. And as long as they're walking to the office with a brain, they're going to be walking into the office with a brainstem, which means you're in that moment where you have this deadline, or you have this client, and you have all of these challenges in front of you. Every single person in that room, in that team, is experiencing a don't want. Every single person's brainstem is offering them a reaction. The question is, are we conscious of it, and are we conscious of how these reactions are affecting each other? In my own company, I have trained my staff on this, and they can very clearly articulate, hold on, I'm in a don't want, I'm reacting right now. Let me get clear. And it is the language and a part of the language and culture of the office right now. So we all know, take a little second, take a look at that. Let's get clear, because what we want is responsiveness. We want cortex in the boardroom. We don't want brainstems.
So are you creating these programs to take to the corporate and entrepreneurial worlds?
I actually am already doing that. So on Thursday, I'll be doing a talk. Yeah, on Thursday, I'll be doing a talk in Aventura. If anyone is interested, you can go on my website, juliaharperinc.com. And it's called Are You a Super Professional? And super professional is actually a way of identifying a particular type of reaction pattern that shows up in business a lot. And that's the business person who wants to control everything, who micromanages, who is on top of this. If somebody doesn't get it right, they'll get it done instead. And what I am highlighting in that conversation, it's a breakfast, an hour and a half talk, is A, let's look at who you are. Are you the super professional? B, what does it cost you and what does it cost your company? And C, how do you change that?
Yeah.
Because it's not effective. A lot of people think being a super professional is effective. They think, oh, I get a lot of stuff done. But at what cost? Long term, it costs you, the individual, and it costs the company. It's the highest form of burnout.
Julia, what amount of this brainstem activity or what you focus on in your work, I'll call, is future oriented, is the result of us not being present? How big is that in terms of this idea?
Well, it's big but it's not just future; it's future and past. Because the only reason the brainstem is activated is because it perceives a threat. And if you look at the reality of it, in the present moment, you are never ever threatened. You are only ever threatened in the future by what could happen, or in the past by what did happen. Mm-hmm. But besides what's going on in your head about the future and the past, in the present, you are always okay, because in the present, you are able to act. So one of the things that I help people to do in business is I say, let's deconstruct what this problem is. And let's pull apart the pieces that's about the future and the past. And let's focus in on what is actually happening. Because you can only act in the facts. You can only act in what is present. You can only respond. And this goes back to now climbing up to the cortex. Cortex can manage present facts. Brainstem is who manages past and future.
That's amazing. You know what, Dr. Julia, I'm thinking that the military needs you. There's a lot of work that has to do with transitional change in the brain, especially their warriors. They're in battle mode, whether it's PTS or PTSD. And they're doing lots and lots of different things. And it sounds like they need you. I'm wondering if you should contact the military.
I would love to, because recently I have been working with some military families and also police and firefighters, so all emergency workers.
Good.
Because back to this concept of the brainstem dealing with a real threat versus a perceived threat, for emergency workers, there is actually a real threat in front of them.
Yes, there is.
So their brainstems are actually triggered in the presence of a real threat. What happens is they then don't turn it off. So they stay in brainstem mode. And that's where the struggle is. They don't know, their brain stems get so set off by the consistent presence of a real threat that when they come out of the threatening situation, their brain stems have now been long wired into that mode of threat. And so everything else has now hits that brainstem that says I'm being threatened, and then you have high levels of reactivity. And the interesting thing is the reactivity doesn't show up in its obvious form. One of the big things that I'm working on is the reactivity that results in disconnection from themselves and disconnection from their families, disconnection from their lives. They have to turn off. They have to numb themselves some way because that level of stress and threat, as supported by many of the studies that look at the health risks and health challenges of people in these situations, is incredible. The level of adrenaline and cortisol running through their bodies, what happens with inflammation. That's why we have so many high percentages of autoimmune disorders, diabetes, hypertension, insomnia in these families. That brainstem has been turned on and they don't know how to turn it off.
Okay, so I have a theory, and I'd love to test it with you. I've been working with the military as a psychologist since the 1980s. I came to this country as a refugee, so I love our military. I'm always just grateful for their freedom, and our country is great because of that. So here's my theory. After watching lots and lots of families and lots of warriors, I believe that someone goes off to war, they're off in theater, they're battle ready. They come back, but in my theory, only 90% of that person comes back. They have to leave 90% of them in theater because that's battle readiness. And then nowadays, there's lots and lots of deployments, especially in the Army, in the Reserve and Guard of all of the forces. So they have more frequent deployments. So then the next deployment, 90% of that person comes back. And then 90% of that on and on until the last deployment. Then I believe they can really reintegrate and they can really heal. So this has been my theory, that it's been a protective mechanism, that some of that is healthy, some of it isn't. But I think it's a natural reaction. So let me test my theory with you. What do you think of my odd little theory?
Well, I think you definitely are onto this concept of having to be battle ready and being in reaction, and that when they go out into deployment, absolutely, the way the brain works is they must be in protective mode. The challenge when they come back is, did I stay, once I stay in battle mode, once I stay in protective mode, that's where the piece of them is left on the battlefield, to support what you're saying. It's the part of their brainstem that doesn't necessarily turn off. So when they get back home, they're not wholly present because that brainstem can't allow them to be wholly present. So I agree with you because I see it. I see it also with parents of children with disabilities who, by the way, there's a study that says mothers of children with disabilities demonstrate the same levels of stress as someone in a frontline battle. So it
is a frontline battle. It is a frontline battle. Yeah, and because not only they're battling every day and their emotions, but they're battling all the doctors, look at how many families you and I have seen together, because I used to work as part of Therapeeds as their psychology consultant. And look at all the families we've seen, and they have to fight so many doctors, different kinds of doctors and different educators who don't get it. And so I just think it's so amazing. So then what do we do? So let's say somebody's a warrior, or they're a mother of a child with a disability, or they're a first responder. What now?
They're warriors, right? We have warriors in this world. You're a warrior at work. You're a warrior on the battlefield. You're a warrior as a mom, right? We all bring that warrior spirit into. You're a warrior battling to get your idea out there into the world, to be an entrepreneur. There's two ways to be a warrior. The most effective warrior is the warrior who knows how to respond, who knows how to fight smart and clean. That's, there's no problem with being a warrior. There are things to be done. We do need our people on the front line. We do need our mothers who are going to fight the doctors. And we do need you to fight for your idea and for your business. So the problem isn't with being a warrior. It's with how you do it, not what you do. So when I do it from my brainstem, that's what brings stress and what's ineffective. When I do it from my cortex with clean, fresh ideas, when I do it as in the present moment, this is what's required of me right now, I am going to be the most effective. That's the warrior that fights on the battlefield and comes off and leaves it there so he could return home 100% rather than 90%. That's the mom who knows how to show up and battle with the doctors, but then she can disconnect from that and go into her car and connect completely to herself and her child. And that's the business person who, when they hear no, can deal with that no and know that I'm resilient enough to go to the next battle. Because all of this is about resilience. What being in stress and reaction does is it depletes you, as you see with the military families.
Yes,
it kills your resilience. And what we need to function in this life is resilience. So this is all about resilience.
And how do you define resilience? I've seen that word used so many different ways. How do you define resilience?
I define resilience as the ability to respond and to reconnect with myself in spite of what is happening outside of me.
That's fascinating. So why do most people resist that?
I don't think it's that people resist it. It's that they don't understand what it is that is actually undermining it. And that's why my message is about what's going on at the brainstem. The brainstem is the unconscious part of the brain, and it hijacks you and it undermines what you want. So it's not that people resist it. It's that the focus is on, trying to get my behavior to change, trying to get my business out there, everyone shows up and asks me, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And my answer is always, it's not always the what, it's the how. You're not paying attention to what's going on with you as you do this. And that's the part where I want to say to people, blame it on the brain. It's not your fault. It's your brain. Pay attention to what your brain is doing.
I think that's a great tagline. Blame it on the brain.
Yeah.
I think that's wonderful. Well, any final words of wisdom for our business leaders, our warriors, whether they're mothers or military service members or first responders, or even people fighting for social justice? What is a final word of wisdom you have for them?
As one of you, because I am a mother and I am a business leader and I am a woman who is in this world fighting for justice, whether it's justice for women, for us to be empowered, or justice for all humanity. I'm like Dr. Margarita, I'm an immigrant. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, came to this country and appreciate the freedoms that are here as well. I've been a fighter for a really, really long time. And I can say this for sure. When I was fighting the wrong way, I was killing myself and I wasn't getting the fight done. I almost destroyed my business. I almost destroyed my marriage. I almost destroyed myself simply because I was unable to see that what I was doing was born from reactivity. I was clear about what I wanted to do. I wanted to build this business. I wanted to have a wonderful marriage. And I thought that my focus had to be on changing my behaviors. So I fought and I fought and I fought and I fought. But when finally I was able to see that all of it was coming from fear and reactivity, from the don't want and from the brainstem that was telling me that I was constantly being threatened, I was able to see my behavior and change my behavior. So my final words is to say, see what's happening with you and know for sure that there is a way to change it. You can rewire your brain and you can become effective and do everything that you want to do without the fight and without the burnout.
Beautiful.
Wow. So how can people get a hold of you, Dr. Julia Harper?
So you can visit my website, juliaharperinc.com, to learn more about the WAY method and neuroplasticity. Also, you can see Therapeeds.com to learn more about the HOPE method and neuroplasticity as it relates to physiology. And I'm also on Facebook, Julia Harper _PhD, and Instagram, Julia Harper _PhD. And I'm, out there trying to connect with people and trying to get this message that we don't have to take the responsibility anymore. We blame it on the brain, and then we move on to rewire the brain so that we can respond and get what we want.
Well, that is wonderful. Well, I have no doubt, Dr. Julia Harper, that you will continue to make a difference in this world. And I'm forever grateful to your grandmother and that shoebox and to that warrior spirit. You really are a unique soul. I'm just blessed that that our paths crossed so many years ago, and I look forward to seeing what you do. You're one of those people that I always think, what's she doing now? What's next? So
right?
You're like a Christmas present that I'm always ready to unwrap. So I can't wait. And I'm hoping you'll come back on the show. And I have a military show called Touch Base Tuesdays. I'm hoping you also come back and talk about the warriors and their experience.
Yeah, that would be
absolutely.
fabulous.
Anytime. You know where to find me. I'm yours.
Beautiful.
I love the idea that you're mine. I carry you carry you in my heart anyway. Julia Harper, you're the best of the best, not only in business but in just about anything. I'm so pleased, and without sounding in any way patronizing, I'm always so very proud of you. You're just such a lovely grown-up.
I love when she says that.
Yes, I love that.
You take care, Julia Harper.
Julia.
Thank you so much, Dr. Julia Harper, changing the world one thought and action at a time.
Thanks for listening to Step Up with Dr. Margarita Gurry. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and visit redshoeinstitute.com for more information about Dr. Margarita Gurry and the work she does.